Hello. So this is the introduction to a new conversation on Sense Space with my good friend Joseph Pickens and Hannah.
Hi.
So do you want to say a little bit about some of what we talked about with Joseph and like what was the conversation like for you?
I really enjoyed it. Joseph and I have had the good fortune of speaking a few times, but this is the first time speaking publicly and being in conversation together in a recorded fashion. So it was a really good conversation, I thought. We hit on areas like faith and the creative process and different aspects of being in process.
Yeah, I feel like you got really deep into the way of overcoming obstacles and like problems caused by cognition and cognitive patterns getting detached from the body, the felt experience and the emotions. So yeah, we were able to really go all the way up to the metaphysics and all the way down to just basic compassion towards yourself and things like that.
Yeah, I hope that we have a chance to expand on some of what was spoken. It's always so interesting being able to watch it back and then realizing like, oh, I didn't even remember we went there, but there's just so many different areas to expand upon. But I think this was a really great conversation between the three of us, and yeah, looking forward to getting to know what people think.
Yeah, absolutely. And this was recorded a few weeks ago before we both took a big trip together and went out to the countryside. So
returning to it.
A lot's changed since then, and looking forward to the next conversation, hopefully this week.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Okay, welcome, Joseph, and welcome, Hannah. This is Sense Space. Apparently, we don't really know what it is, but we felt like it was a good time to bring together this very special triad for a little conversational journey. And by way of introduction, Hannah is my girlfriend, love of my life, and music producer, and excellent businesswoman and business coach for me. And with us we have Joseph, who is, wow, he's an aficionado of the arts, sciences, and one of my ongoing longest and highest quality conversational fellows and friends. So it's good to have Joseph here today as well. How are you guys doing? I don't know which one of you is going to speak first, but I'm going to leave it up to chance.
I feel really good. I have no idea where this is going to go, but I think that's good.
Yeah, happy to be speaking with you again. We wanted to just see you and have an opportunity to to catch up and reconnect. And so this is a pleasure. Really happy to be doing this.
Well, thank you. I'm excited for this.
Yes. So what is this? What is going on here? I think we need to sink into it a little bit, sink into this space that is kind of gathering here between the three of us. We're all bringing our worlds together here and all the differences that exist.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you guys feel is present for you showing up today, or even in this very moment?
I feel quite relaxed. I actually feel quite good not knowing what conversation is to be had, and just being here. It's actually just kind of a nice way to spend the time with one another. So I feel like it's where I'd want to be anyway.
That was really nice.
Yeah, I'm also feeling very relaxed and energized at the same time.
Yeah, I think I used to feel that those were contradictory things, and now my life is kind of forcing me to bring relaxation and intense engagement with life. Those two things kind of, it feels like the way that wisdom would have me go if I was to become more wise would be to somehow be fully engaged with everything I'm doing, but also kind of relaxed.
Mm-hmm.
I had a bike ride in Berlin. I had taken a little bit of psilocybin with Hannah and headed off riding around the center of Berlin with this profound sense of just breathing with the world. Like there was this feeling that the sort of exterior of me was more porous, and not in a bad way, in a way that felt like a capacity to breathe in and out and let things go and invite things in. And yeah, I felt in that place whilst I was riding that bike, and it was a really beautiful sunny day. I could just lean back, be relaxed, and kind of be in a very gentle flow state with the bike. Not have to think too much about how I'm maneuvering it. And yeah, that's my little impressionist painting for you guys about where those two things are meeting for me right now.
There's relaxation and a type of energizing element to I can. When we are in a state of I can, then even if something's new, there's a place where I feel these words allow for me to get creative in my solutions towards navigating it. It's different than I will. There's something about the idea that, like, to manifest or to have some sort of affirmation, one must be in the position of I will do X, Y, Z, I will blah, blah, blah. But I find that actually I can, it's allowing for that part of me that might not have faced a certain particular situation. I give myself the spaciousness to get excited about the possibility that I can do something that I haven't done yet. And this gives me the spark of inspiration to maybe figuring out what that is. And it's different than I must, or I should, or any of those sort of things, but just the ability, I can do this. I can do this. And then that allows for some, that just allows for me to stay with the project or with the thing that I am working with at the time. And it also means I can take a break. I can go outside. I can make a cup of tea. When I'm in, I can, then it's like I'm granting myself permission. And hopefully that permission is being called forth by my higher resolution, wisdom, thoughts, or mind that is granting the permission to just, yeah, be with it.
That makes me think of the word faith, which has been something that's I think currently in the process, it's a word that's currently in the process of being renewed for me. Because the way it's used in the Christian context, in which I've always been familiar with it, is almost synonymous with like belief at a propositional level, but with a certain kind of irrational justification or lack of rational justification for the belief, and that's somehow what faith is. But I think what you're speaking to is more aligned with my renewed understanding of faith, which is I think there's both an active component to it and a passive component to it. I think the active component is a commitment to the creative process, whatever it is. So you're actively committed to seeing it through. And simultaneously, there's also the passive component, which is a trust in that which is external, that which is that which you're co-creating with, because you're always creating in relationship to something. Creation always happens out of a relationship, and so that there has to be a trust in whatever it is you're in relationship to, and a commitment to that process that's emerging between oneself and the world. That summarizes my renewed understanding of faith, and I think that aligns well with what you're referring to.
Amen to that.
Yeah. Spot on. Can I just jump in with one thing? So actually what I love about what you just said is the commitment to the process, which is slightly distinct from commitment to the task, because we're given the extracurricular activities, or we're given the assignments or the projects or the things that we want to do, and we have our lists and stuff. But actually within each thing, there's a process. Each task is going to elicit a process from us. And so our relationship to each task is, like you said, that co-created dynamic of how we show up with what this thing is asking. Within this little thing, within this, let's say setting up a business or something like that, you break it down into all different sort of components of that, and then you see where we relate to each of these steps. And that is the commitment to the process. And when we commit ourselves to the process, we actually end up getting the things done, but getting them done in a way that brings us forward into transformation with every step, because we're somehow aware of how we are undertaking what's ahead, what lies ahead, or what we want for ourselves. So it's not just so much a doing and outcomes, it's actually what is happening within us and who we are in the process, who we become in parallel with the doing and the outcomes.
Yeah, I think between all those processes is where we are. Somehow there's all the different relationships, my relationship to nutrition, my relationship to how much I go outside, how much time I spend deeply in nature. But then there's also how diligently am I pursuing these like more bureaucratic or organizational goals and things like that. And somehow a disposition of really intuitively listening, but then when things are coming, like bringing them into the center and taking them head on. And in the process of taking things head on that previously you were not taking head on, sort of expanding the periphery, like participating so fully in the moment, in the flow, that the flow somehow draws forth the areas that you need to work on, or the little thing that you needed to come into confrontation with, or the little thing that you left out of balance 2 years before and never addressed, or whatever it was. Those things are allowed to come in and treated the same way as those bureaucratic tasks, which is to bring them front and center and deal with them in a loving kind of way. So that has been, that expresses something pretty essential to our life experience right now as a couple, I feel. And also to my experience starting my business, starting my dialogic practice, my one-to-one practice. And that's been really full steam ahead this last month or two. Yeah.
So there's two things. One is with regard to the outcome of the creative process, which I feel in some sense you have to almost be completely unattached to it in order to create. And the commitment to the process rather than to some sort of product is, this would be the second thing, is that it's very local, like present in time, or at least it's it's connected to what is local and present. Because I'm thinking about if you have a vision, like a creative vision, it can be great. It can be a grand vision, and like, oh yeah, it'd be cool if you could do that. But it has to be connected to where I am right now in order to actually bring it about. And I have to there's a felt sense associated with this, where it's like, and this is associated with faith, I think. Like this is the feeling I associate with faith, is like this continuity between where I am right now and the creative vision, the creative goal. And that, yeah, there's this element of like, okay, keeping your head down, not getting, too far up here and looking too far ahead. It's like I have to stay attentive to the next step, right here and right now. And that's life. That's life in general, because life is this creative process. Yeah, and being unattached to, being committed to that local, the next step, and being unattached to the outcome of that, where it takes you. Because you know that wherever it takes you, you're going to be right there taking the next step.
And life is also happening in parallel. So we can make plans. We can. It is good to be able to once, say, there is a sort of vision that is established, or something that you would like to see manifest. It's great to be able to work backwards into the present moment. That can help you structure what those next steps are. However, it's not just the steps that is going to bring you from A to B. Part of the execution of the steps is much more of a inside internal relation with ourselves every day, with everything that we are coming across, because our emotions are going to be a part of this process, as are the other situational, circumstantial things of our lives, of other people and other relationships that we're in as well. So it's not going to work in a vacuum where we're just going to every day wake up and have a new step. There's so many other processes that are happening all around. So the commitment is actually really just like seeing how we show up on a much more, local level, in integrity, rushing through something to try to speed ahead at a cost of tiring our bodies out, or tiring the people around us out, or whatever it is not necessarily what the process that Jacob and I would allow for. It's not about racing to some goal or some outcome, as you said. It's really, the juiciness is in seeing how we're showing up and what it is that's actually preventing us, perhaps sometimes, from showing up fully. Maybe there's a certain thing that is required of us to pass go, but it's something we've never done before. And so there's nervousness, or there's some component that just feels daunting. And then who we are for one another to reckon with that and allow that in, and use it for our own transformation to handle stressful situations better, with more ease, with more belief in ourselves, is so much of the satisfying commitment to this process. And as well, one more thing, when it comes to vision, we were speaking about this with another friend of ours recently. I mentioned how I believe when there's a vision that is of such resolution in which it just propels our spirit, where it like awakens us into it's almost something that could be, that when we imagine it in its fullest form, it lights us up. I believe that these visions are much more, they're important. It's not just about doing something cool, although that's part of it. If it's speaking to you in a way that is allowing for your spirit to become awakened, I feel there's some divine or high resolution contact that we are making contact with. It's not just the conjuring of a brain, it's access to a channel that is buzzing through all of the noise to reach us. And when it does, it opens us. And to me, I feel this is like, okay, if that's there, then it is a bit of the hero's journey to navigate it. I wouldn't be given this seed, this idea, if it wasn't for me to at least reach for. And so that is, I think, part of the element of faith, and not necessarily in the divinity sort of way, but a faithfulness, F-U-L-L, a fullness of faith, where we can fill ourselves with that trust that if I'm given this vision, it's given for a reason. It's not just I don't know, if it can cut through, then I say it can carry you through difficult times as well, somehow, some way.
I really appreciated what you said. I want to hear what Joseph's about to say too.
Okay, so there was, I think, two things I wanted to say. Yeah, the steps of the creative process are certainly not linear, and they're certainly not something you can plan out in advance necessarily. What kept coming up as you were talking, Hannah, was this well, okay, first there's this image that I have. As you were saying, you said something about and like life at the beginning, you said something about life is happening all around you as you're taking these steps. And the image that it actually came up earlier in this conversation, and it's come up earlier in just my life. It's this image of that radical non-linearity of the creative process and the complexity of it. And what it feels like is like I'm walking along, and this thing comes up, this creative idea, and I just sort of like toss it over there, and it lands somewhere, and it like does its own thing. And then something else comes up, and I just sort of toss it over here, and it takes on a life of its own and does its own thing. And I just am doing this as I'm walking. And then I'm sort of like, circling back at some point, and then like I'm interacting with these creative things that have now been, taken root and grown up out of the ground, and they're reshaping me as I'm interacting with them. And the fearful tendency that stops the flow of that creative process is, it's something like I throw one of these ideas out, and then it's like, oh, I need to stop everything and make sure like this does what I want it to do. And you sort of like take this control over it. and you try and like get it to grow. And then of course you're like missing out on the journey as you're doing that. And it's like, well, you just have to like, you'll come back to it when it's time to come back to it, and you'll see where it is at that point, and then you'll tend to it then. But it's sort of this, yeah, it's this flowing, graceful, there's a dance like music like quality to it. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that it's almost a challenge on what you were saying about the vision being sort of this thing that's given to us from above, because I think there's also the bottom up component, and it's sort of these two meeting in this dialectical process where I'm creating the vision as I'm living my life in the same way that it's creating me and calling me towards it. It's that's how I think about notions of fate or destiny. Is there's sort of these attractors in the state space of my life, and like this dynamical system that I am, and those attractor states emerge out of the dynamics of my life from the bottom up. But then at the same time, it's like they're pulling me. That attractor state is pulling me toward it, and so the creative process happens between John Vervaeke refers to this in conversations he's had with Paul Vanderklay and Jonathan Pajot as like the emergence from the bottom up and emanation from the top down. And it's those two together, that dialectic, that is fundamental to the creative process at all levels of reality. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say.
That's great. Just want to clarify one thing, and let you jump in if you would like, but I totally with you on that. I actually don't believe that the vision, or what I meant was not something that is given first off or from above. So for me, it's more within the dialectical approach that you're speaking of, where it's coming from within and then it can pull you at the same time. Totally. And I think that's the ongoing process that is here. But actually, what I wanted to talk about was more a distinct vision. If ever we come across, so for instance, in my life, I had a vision to come to Berlin when I was in San Francisco. And it was actually a sensorial, visual vision that I did not understand at the time. And there were no words or anything, but it was an image that, or a state I was in which there was an image that I felt was me in a place that I sort of knew to be Berlin, but there was nothing distinct about it to indicate that that was the case. Mm-hmm. But it was such a strong vision that I texted my friend that evening, who was German, to tell her, I think I need to move to Berlin, and then fell asleep that evening, forgot about it. And then the next morning saw my phone and saw her response, to which I was like, what is she talking about? And it's, oh, right, that vision I had. And that was, for me, a distinct phenomenon of something that happened that was so high resolution, it cut straight to my spirit and transported me to a whole possibility that I had not considered previously. So I guess when I say vision, I'm being quite specific about a sort of phenomenon that calls us, that is speaking from a high resolution heart level. And it's not something that is necessarily given from above or anything like that. But I had somehow aligned with something that came into my awareness that I then, almost like a psychedelic experience, where I said to myself, you know, this is not a no thing. I took it seriously, so seriously that I ended up like doing the preliminary steps of talking to people who had lived abroad before, inquiring with them what the experience was like. And then of course, to follow through on the vision, there's all the steps, right? And lo and behold, 6.5 years later, here I am still in Berlin. But yeah, I find that the creative process and creative living is what Jacob and I are dedicated to here in our home every single day. But occasionally in doing so and being part of that process, we will be sort of able to speak or receive a sort of thought or idea that just like, holy shit, that would be so freaking cool if that happened. Like, or do you know what this just made me think of? What if, and like, just like, oh yeah. And what's so great is that no idea has ever come across as being too crazy or out there. Everything's just yes, 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 and yes, and yes, and. And like, I think that's part of the improvisational component of this, is we're just sort of in this constant improv with one another where nothing is off the table, as long as it's keeping the spirits, illuminated. We just keep going with it.
Yeah, we do.
Mm.
I think it's very interesting that we've arrived on this topic, because Hannah and I have been editing a paper that I'm probably going to publish after this conversation, about navigating the hyper conversation, based on the whole experience of the last 18 months. And a big part of that was about navigating intuitively and listening for those interactions where the world is kind of calling to you. There's like a golden thread, but then there's also you calling the world forth, and you're somehow in the center point between these, and you're having to come into balance. Balance is a big one for us right now. There's a lot of depth to balance that I'm starting to really realize. But I think there's almost different qualities of vision involved for us right now. There's such a startling degree of uncertainty that the solidity of any plan we've made in the last 6 months has been liquid. But it's been very interesting to become more willing and better at imagining or dreaming together. So yeah, sort of allowing oneself to imagine what would be the life that you would really, really want to have. What would be the qualities? For me, it's very much nature. For Hannah, it's also very much nature is a big feature of it.
Particularly with animals.
And rivers and frogs and fish to catch. And Hannah's got a unique relationship to nature too, from her childhood. So anyway, I totally digress and lost myself. But yeah, this learning relationship to the world is what is one of the big themes of my life right now, our life together, this paper that I'm going to publish, and I think what you're talking about as well. And there's some interesting intersection between like dreaming a bigger dream and letting go of the constraints that prevented you from dreaming bigger dreams. For me, starting a business, starting to believe that I have something of value that I can offer to people in the world and receive money for that, that has brought me into contact with so many hidden layers and constraints and thought patterns, and no doubt some of it is Christian, but I think a lot of it is the attitudes of the English working class for like many generations. And I'm really starting to understand the bondage, or the way in which that culture and that system of like hard class separation, pre-modern England, the way they kind of got the working class to police themselves, or to keep themselves where they were, by maintaining a consensus of view constraint. If somebody was to come along in a working class context and start having views that really diverged from the accepted set of constraints, they wouldn't do very well. So in any case, a lot of self-discovery involved in just doing something that, you know, you'd think would be quite straightforward, but I'm realizing there's so much transformation of self that comes in participating in the world more fully, and, you know, professionally, or however you want to describe it.
And the results are astounding, because part of what I'm witnessing and in practice of, being the person that has had some experience already with creating a dream scenario for my work life, in which I'm very fulfilled by. That was a long process. And in a sense, I'm almost seeing this situation with Jacob as an area to really play and discover what happens when someone can have dedicated mentorship, in which they can loosen the grip of certain ways of thinking that have been generational, perhaps, and within a sort of, and cultural, and what can happen when we just go so hard in creating many more possibilities than ever thought could be on the table, and we take them seriously. And I stay in the space of you can, we can, and also have, from my own personal lived experience, the things that I can offer about launching a business. I'm seeing, witnessing
In Germany,
the fast track of going from a certain way of seeing money, business, entrepreneurial endeavor, oneself in the world, because all those things, they influence how we see ourselves in the world. You know, the world, the economic realm of the world is a big theme when it comes to wanting to make your own business. And so we're addressing that head on. And in just a few short months, it's astounding. I think this is why it's important to have actually the two of us, because you would almost get lost in it. I can remind Jacob of like where we were and where we are. And that indicates also like, well, if if we want to take sort of the evidence here of how quickly things can change and our whole mindsets can change through this dedicated, you can do this, here's how we're going to figure this out and stay aligned. It's like crazy where things can go. It is uncertain because the doors of possibility begin to open through the door and the realm of the imaginal.
Okay, so I have a big question, one that I've been wrestling with lately. In many ways, it's like the critical question for me right now, which is, why do we ever, or why did we ever, as humans, fall out of the proper relationship to the creative process? How is that even possible for us? Why does that happen? I've been reading this book called Christ the Eternal Tao, which is it's an Orthodox Christian book that's synthesizing many of the insights from Taoism into Christianity. And in there, the first good third of it is just poetry that's depicting that sort of original harmony. And then there's this notion of the fall from that original harmony. And Christianity has this notion of original sin, which is that fall from that original unity with God, with the source of creation. And specifically in the Christian story, there's this serpent figure that's part of that. This adversary, accuser figure that is first, importantly, part of creation, like part of this musical unfolding thing. And yet it's in some sense undermining our participation in that thing. And that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around is, so for me, that accuser shows up as sort of like this, when I'm participating in that, in the musicality of being, it shows up and says something like, you're doing it wrong. Or the cynic, and I'm not sure the relationship between those two, the cynic and the accuser, but there's something in common they have if they're not the same figure. The cynic says something like, well, what's the point? Sort of like standing detached from it all. And there's somehow that the figure of the accuser and the cynic, and I don't know if they're the same thing. It's like that's why we come out of relationship to this, to the logos, the Tao, the way. That's the critical question for me. It's like the nature of that accuser figure or that cynic figure. What role does it play in the creative process? Because it plays a role. It's here, but somehow it undermines the whole thing.
If you believe it.
can I make a less direct move into the question? With a little preface, perhaps, that I've been getting a sense that this question of the fall, let's say the fall into history, is not a question with a single answer, but is more like a multiplicity of different answers, all of which seem to have truth to them and are somehow layered on top in relationship to one another. So there's a really complex story of, some people point to the development of consciousness, that we would, that somehow our consciousness grew too fast. And this caused this sort of journey into being and into the world and into history that became imbalanced. More recently, I've been reading a really amazing book called The Spell of the Sensuous by David Abram. And he gives account of the development of language, of written language, as a kind of primary rupture from the sensory world, and that the sensuous capacities that were so attuned to the rocks, the trees, the rivers, and the animals, the magic of that, in some sense, was transferred into the written words. And then our minds began to be conformed to the written word. And there's this whole interesting side point that the Hebrew, the early Hebrews did not include the vowel sounds in the aliveVybe, or the Hebrew alphabet of the Talmud. And so there was an idea there that the author was sketching out that they did not breathe life, that the words did not have life or magic until it was breathed into them through the participation with them. So this is all interesting and loosely collected here for you as a preface to my question, which is that as you were describing, like, I wonder if there's a journey into a narrative, perhaps, of the question as you framed it. Insofar as the question you've brought to me is in itself a kind of object which tends to a certain directionality, I felt drawn when you spoke to ask about the orthodox. Like, it felt like the word orthodox was intoned with some meaning that I wanted to hear more about. And I feel like that might somehow illuminate the wider question. Like, I wonder if it's a different, like, what's your relationship there? Is it a different kind of Christianity from the one that you were raised with?
Definitely, yes. And it's something I've been exploring lately, because I've seen that it's a form of Christianity that's much more intertwined with wherever I am right now, and with the way that I make sense of what I see as like this very musical unfolding of reality. Like it's a musical symphony that's happening here. And it's interesting that the Orthodox, particularly the Greek Orthodox Church, uses the Greek word logos to describe, Christ as the embodied logos, and in the Protestant world, at least, that was always translated as word, and you never get the etymological richness and significance of that. And anyway, as I've come to understand logos and what that is within the context of our conversations, Jacob, and also the conversations in this space that people like John Vervaeke are having, putting those two together, logos as this, the way I understand it is it's like this, it's like the fundamental creative principle of this musical, what do I call it? This just musical symphony. And it has something to do with what we were talking about earlier with the bottom up and the top down coming together, and then they meet in this they meet at the level of the like incarnate particular. It's like it's where that creative seed is like planted, and then it becomes something, and this is happening at every layer of reality, starting at the quantum all the way up to the cosmic. This dialectic between bottom up and top down, and you could think of this as in any sort of complex system, all of the parts are being informed by the whole, and the whole is being formed by the bottom up emergence of the parts and the way that the parts are organized. And it's what Vervaeke refers to it as the structural functional organization of any system. Like that's the logos is the way that system is manifest right now in this moment, out of it's the way it shows up in actuality out of all of the potential of those parts in relationship to the whole. And then there's the I think Jordan Peterson would think of it as like this, associate it more with speech and the spoken word, and this is where the word comes into this, where it's in this book I'm reading, it talks about the Trinity as this Father, Son, Spirit, mind, word, breath, and that the word is proceeding from the mind as the Son proceeds from the Father, and then the breath is always a part of that. You can't speak without the breath, which touches on what you were saying about the Hebrew language, the Hebrew writing, not including vowels. Like the breath is only involved when you actually go to make to make actual the potential of the mind. And so there's something about the process of logos that can be seen in the potential of the mind becoming actual in the word, and that's what's symbolized in Christ being incarnate at a particular point in history. And I've come to see that at least within the narrative of Christianity, that particularity, that particular point in history is important. Like the particular, that's where that's where I don't think you can, I don't think love I don't think you can love a thing for its generality. I think you can only love a thing for its particularity, and that's so the particulars is important there. But then, okay, so then in Christianity, the thing that's important is that the logos is the answer to the whatever problem was introduced by this accuser, which is, translates as Satan, that figure, which shows up as sort of this evolutionary step in human consciousness, the evolution of human consciousness, which is I'm interested in the cognitive element of that. It's like, what is actually going on that allows us to undermine our own participation in creation, and like, how is that even possible for us as cognitive agents? And then I'm interested in, I guess what Orthodox Christianity has to say about that, because it seems that they're speaking to that in a way that I haven't encountered in the Protestant world. And anyway, the revelation of the Logos incarnate in history, there's something about that within Christianity, within the Christian story, that's supposed to be the solution to the problem of the accuser undermining the creative process. It's like, that's where the redemption comes in. So I'm trying to make sense of all of that.
No, it's very juicy. It's also very messy. And I think we're gonna weave it into a multi-dimensional hyperobject together in the next period coming. But I just want to turn on another light because it's getting a little dark in here, and I know Hannah really wants to say something.
No, this is really good and really interesting. And I actually love learning more about Christian thought through you, Joseph, and through your conversations, because although I was raised, I guess I could say raised Christian, I mean, I was actually raised a Christian Scientist, so it's quite different. Not Scientology, really? Yes.
Interesting, I didn't know that.
Yes. So, but and that is a totally different, or at least the way in which it was related to me is very different from any of the things that you guys talk about. And so you guys have opened my eyes to Christianity in a way that I was never exposed to. So I really enjoy listening to you and being like, wow, I wouldn't have these contemplations because I just was not exposed to them. But there's relatedness no matter what. And I personally find that in the idea of the serpent that undermines, the way in which what that says to me is this is a process of forgetting and remembering. And whether or not this process is good or bad, I find it to be not a moral question. I don't think it's about it being good or bad. I see it as it just is a forgetting and a remembering. And the forgetting feels like disconnection. And the remembering feels like connection. So when I am the serpent undermining myself through my critical voice, or through the mindset or the mentality that wears me down, makes me doubt, when I'm experiencing that, whether or not I superimpose those thoughts onto a serpent to help me rein it in, or I just think about it as my own internal voice, or some people would call it like ego mind, whatever it is, it's a forgetting. It's something that then we can, and that can be a disconnection, which makes us uncomfortable, disconnected from our somatic responses. We start to get fatigued or ill or whatever. Yeah, it can show up through all sorts of little symptoms and manifestations of discomfort, dis-ease, where we feel like we've somehow taken a misdirection. And then all of a sudden we're back on. Something happened where I could turn it around, or I was able to come across something that could lift me back into a state of remembrance. And then this, in my own personal life, is where faith takes on a sort of, if I see my faith as conditional based on my thoughts, then that's not really faith. Once I've come into enough contact with seeing the miracles in my life, and when I say miracle, I don't necessarily mean a Christian miracle, because I don't think in those terms, but I do understand that the language miracle might mean something to whomever based on the faith they're in. And I'll use the word, there have been enough miracles and enough occurrences in my life where I've been able to feel like, oh, wow, getting back into right alignment, that I can now hold more faith even when that critical serpent voice wants to put doubt into the picture or whatever. I can somehow not let that become my mindset. I can somehow remember, look, there's a blue sky above those gray clouds, whether or not I can see it. I may be in a funk right now, but this is going to pass. And why? Well, because I've lived enough experiences to know that that's the case. But there were many years prior to that where I did not know that that was the case. And every time the gray clouds came, it was my reality. I was in that reality. Then everything else, all the good, was somehow a distant memory. And it's very disorienting and troublesome for the soul. And now it's like, I feel I've been able to live through a tumultuous 15 years to be able to come through the other side and be like, wow, even when things are difficult now, I actually quite feel, I understand that the goodness and the remembering is somehow more with me. I can carry it with me and not be consumed by the voice as if it is my own. And so if anything, it's for me just been an exercise in learning how to remember after forgetting. And hopefully with a collection of returns, more returns, then you can get enough evidence that the return is inevitable somehow, or I will put faith into that. I will put faith into that because that will carry me through this. And that can be a metaphorical truth. Brett Weinstein has talked about the metaphorical truth, that even if something is not necessarily true, if you believe that it is, you might do better than had you not believed it. And so thoughts that carry me through, cool. Thoughts that are just gonna keep me stuck where I am, thank goodness I have an amazing partner who can speak to that, and vice versa, so that we just don't wallow chilling with the serpent. Or if we are, if we are, we can call it out like it is and be like, oh yeah, that's what I'm doing.
That's such a good way of putting it. It's like hanging out with someone that you just know is going to invite the worst. You're doing it intentionally. Yeah.
Chilling with the serpent.
Oh. Yeah, there's a lot in there, and I want to kind of clarify what I meant when I said it was juicy and messy before. But before I do that, amen. That was really something to hear and witness. There's something here about fragmentation, I think, that might be a more universal understanding of what this serpent voice, serpent consciousness has to do with. So we can think of fragmentation, you know, some part of us is cut off in the past, unbeknownst to us. And in that sense, a part of us, our larger self, is not present in the present. If I'm here with you, but there's these 3 branches going back here that I'm not aware of, because I'm cut off from them, because I haven't grown into them yet, then I'm here and those things are there, and there's a kind of, it's like dark matter. It's emotional dark matter. It's you know, trauma in the most subtle sense. And so what's beautiful to me about when you mentioned the breath in this Taoist Christian text is that I've been having this awakening to the wind as an animating force of nature. And it feels like I started out with the trees, like that was my portal, that's what I discovered. Fractals, branching patterns, the almost breathing aliveness, musicality of the trees, discovered that. And it was later on the birds. That was, you know, maybe January to March of this year. And then the last 2 months, I would say it's been the wind. I've started to allow myself to feel the wind as this as it is spirit or breath as a participation with the spirit of wind, and speech as logos, as a manipulation of wind, of the animating spirit wind of life. And so therein lies the sacred participation of these vocal rhythms. And it's such a curious thing to discover. And as I look out the window, I notice a very illuminated half moon. It's just like appeared perfectly in line with our window here. It is revealed by, not by itself, but by the things it interacts with. So you don't see the wind, you see the rustling of the canopy. And so it's very, it feels very much of that Taoist flavor. Somehow, and maybe it's too soon or too daring for me to make this connection, but I'll gently just lay it on the side here and we'll see about it. But it's very interesting that the metaphor of musicality is the one that feels most metaphysically, imminently, poetically relevant to you, and is also how you're participating with the world. artistically. And so it's interesting to see what we participate with becomes the metaphorical ground almost. And the more time we spend with music and with nature, with trees, with animals, with our bodies, with art and so forth, all of it begins to conform our understanding and get us closer. And I think throwing Newtonian the Newtonian rule-based understanding of the cosmos and the universe a little bit out the window. That's sort of, I think that I'm allowing that to become solvent as well, and consider that the phenomenological experience should be the ground from which the metaphor arises. And so it's really about being more present, and a very expansive present, and a sense that actually the universe didn't start sometime in history and now we're kind of on the edge of it, moving away from it, but that we are in some sense the center of the universe. Like the pre-modern mythic view kind of had it right. It didn't match up with the Newtonian reality that we're, you know, several planets away from the sun and in an unimportant, distant galaxy. But phenomenologically, as I sit on the street, there is novelty emerging out of view. Like someone rides a bike around a corner and it's like, where the fuck did that come from? As far as I'm concerned, reality is emerging in front of me. And that's such an animating thing, if you can really sink into it and notice and get past the deceptions and fragmentations that take you away from that, then the moment feels quite ineffably consuming. And then the narrative of how it got there and where it's going somehow becomes a lot more soluble and is just an outflowing of different metaphors from participations in different aspects, because we're trying to describe something that's between all of them. So I riffed all around the question, but it's still nestled in the middle there somewhere.
Yeah, I guess I'm not sure where to. There was so much there. I'm not sure where to pick it up. Yeah, I think there's this question in my mind of like, the fragmentation of reality, is that something that happens prior to the dawn of human self-consciousness, or whatever happened in the Garden of Eden story was like prior to that? Is this something that other animals experience? Is it I guess I'm trying to get at like to what degree is that fragmentation or that forgetting something that's inherent to reality at the most fundamental level, or if it's something that comes into being with this particular capacity we have as human beings. But I don't know if that's the direction that the conversation necessarily wants to go. That's That's where my questions want to go.
I'm open to follow you right out to
Yeah.
the edge.
All right.
And totally alpaca. So I think that being said, I will hear from you if you're going to say something.
Yes, but you can say something too.
I'm experiencing
Hmm.
a sudden amnesia of what I was going to say.
Well,
So
there we go. Here's
I'll wait for
forgetting
it
in
to
action.
reemerge.
Can we pause for 1 second? I'm gonna go check on the dog. I'll be right back.
Cool.
Awesome.
All right, sorry about that.
No problem.
Perfect timing.
The theme of inquisitiveness, I believe, is one that might be, in a way, very particular to humans. I'm not sure that it's only humans that can be inquisitive, because I'm not up on the latest, nature findings, discoveries in terms of consciousness in other animal species. But I think the flavor of inquiring and questioning is something that I would say has a unique human flavor to it. And what, Joseph, how do you relate to this inquiry into the meaning of why we might somehow feel as though we are somehow bumped outside of alignment or bumped off of the creative process? What is your relationship to that experience or that question?
Well, as you were asking that question, I felt it feels like it's a very weighty question. I felt that in my body. It was a lot of stirring. Because it really is the fundamental question that sort of gets at the heart of human suffering, of my suffering in my life. And I think there's something about the accuser and shame that go together, and shame has been a big struggle of my life. So there's that personal quality to it. I know not everyone experiences shame to the same degree, but in some sense it's there as a thing to be experienced for humanity in general, in a way that I don't think it is for other animals. And the shame, and then the other thing I would say is anxiety. Trying to get to a place of overcoming those two ways in which the process of creation can sort of deviate destructively. That's really the I think it has to do with suffering fundamentally, my own suffering and the suffering of those I love. It's like, why do we have this capacity to come out of this harmonious relationship to creation? There's some role that accuser plays. There's some role that our capacity for shame and anxiety plays in creation. And in some sense, like the chronic anxiety or chronic shame is when that role sort of takes over, and there's sort of a narcissistic flavor to it, in the same way that when a cancer cell, I was just reading this paper, Michael Levin, who's a developmental biologist. It was a paper on cognition and what is it called? Scale-free cognition and notions of self. That's not the exact title, but talking about how in biological organization, the way in the biological world things are organized, there's notions of self that can expand and contract. And so when a multicellular organism is functioning properly, each cell in that organism has this notion of self that goes beyond its own the boundaries of it's it on its own as a cell. So it's serving some sort of higher order emergent self. And a cancer cell is when that self, the cancer cell comes out of relationship with the cells around it and starts behaving again as if it were a unicellular thing. And so it's just serving itself and, reproduces out of control. How did I get onto that? What was I just talking about?
It seemed like the narcissism of...
Oh yeah. So yeah, when it's like, there's something unique about humans in that it's like our motivations can sort of take over in this narcissistic fashion, the way that a cancer cell takes over, rather than sort of being a well-integrated part of a larger whole. It's sort of like this, shame can take over the whole thing, and suddenly the reality you're living is one of shame, and it's like, you're chilling with the serpent, and that's not very fun. Or anxiety, where it's like you don't really know what your process you're participating in at any given time. It's like you don't know where you are, and reality is sort of the creative thread of your life is just in this constant state of like fraying, and it's not taking you anywhere. And it seems like every move you make is the wrong move. So yeah, I think for me this question, when I get the right perspective on it, it's not just a heady question that tickles my curiosity. It's weighted in the everyday struggles. It's like I bring into this conversation some sort of shame or some level of shame and anxiety. Often when I go to speak, there's a level of shame and anxiety that's sort of affecting my ability to express myself, and that's here in this conversation. and so it's all the way, this sort of, I guess there's a question of how cosmic this accuser figure, like what's the metaphysical nature of this accuser figure. But then it certainly shows up at this, at least at the psychological level, at this very particular practical everyday level, and it's a source of a lot of suffering. So it's like, how do you integrate that figure into reality? Because it's there, you got to do something with it. And I guess, why is it there? What role is it supposed to be playing? Or is it just like did God screw up in creating the serpent? That's like, how is it, what role does it play?
I think if we were in person, this would be a time in which I would be inclined to put my hand on you, put my hand on your back, because I think there's something about the unspoken gesture of touch, and to feel love that is part of this. As an answer or an anecdote to the pain.
That was lovely. And I want to add to it also, because I feel that some of the language, like the language of shame, is never a word that I particularly identified with. And I think I know what it refers to. I think it refers to parts of myself that I'm cut off from and somehow in rejection of, or I think the consequences of the integration of that would be untenable somehow. And yet in the context of...
Sorry, hold on 1 second.
The guest just arrived.
Uh-huh. You have a stop time?
No.
Okay. Just chew it.
Yeah, I'm having fun.
Okay. Is lighting okay? Should I see if I can
I'm fine. It doesn't
grab
bother
another
me.
one?
It bothers you.
No, I just feel like I could do something softer.
This feels so
Or like
soft.
one additional one.
Is okay. We just have completely different ways of thinking how lighting works. More light is not soft to me. More light is harder.
Wow, I was gonna get that orb. Blank
To
out.
me, it's that one really gives me that one's softer to you for whatever reason. For me, it's like lines my. But if you want to go get it,
No, it's okay. I don't need it.
you can put it there if you want it.
Yeah, that'd be tight actually.
No, not at the cost of the fan. Okay.
what was it talking about? Something
You were
about
talking about shame.
Yeah. Right. Wow. I didn't realize I was getting with such a Christian woman.
What do you
But I
mean?
am.
What do you mean?
The Spirit of Christ moves through you. But to the benefit of our guests and friends.
Wow.
Oh,
Right. Change of scenery.
this is interesting. Very light, somehow corresponding with our own flowers.
Yes, very nice. I like that.
Sorry again for all the interruptions.
No problem.
It's really nice light in this one. So yeah, okay. I think I have the thread. If you're feeling ready. Are you feeling ready? Oh boy.
Leave away. Oh boy.
Okay. So yeah, I think what I reflect is that in the course of our relationship of the past year, like shame hasn't really existed. Like it hasn't been a thing with any currency. There's been a lot of shadow parts of ourselves and fragmented parts of ourselves that came up, and fortunately we became better and better at recognizing and making space for and releasing or speaking into and through. So yeah, I wonder if there's something about the spirit of shame that upholds itself somehow. And I also feel the presence of the musical and the musicality as an unknown quantity that somehow sits in relationship to what we're talking about. Like a geist, a little geist somewhere here.
Well, I think I would like to bring into the space that shame is something that has been, I've carried shame for a long time. And it feels like it somehow speaks to a certain perception of badness. I had a belief about myself. The shame was tethered to the belief of some fundamental badness that I couldn't really shake off, no matter how much I tried to outthink it or to just, try to minimize it or whatever it was, escape the pain that came from this experience that I would have. And it would a recurring experience of shame and also guilt, but guilt is somehow not the same as shame. Both have, given me quite much grief, but this is why the at a more intimate level, I think hearing about how it's somehow the shame is prompting, what I'm hearing from you is that it's prompting you to really address this fundamental question. But I'm hearing how it's somehow playing in relationship with the biblical idea of the serpent. And for me, I did not have that association, but I did have the experience of feeling shame, deep shame. And actually, it has been much, much more in recent times that even thinking about things in symbols or like some more biblical things that I could somehow place it onto has given me something to work with in a different way. But I think if I were to have come from the line of thought where I've associated certain negative emotions or feelings with biblical stories, that's a different thing that I wonder, how tightly are these things tethered together? And are you able to somehow untether them to get to a different, to somehow be able to feel into what this experience of shame is? Because if we were sitting in a field right now, hanging out outside together in person, we would be able to probably get into more of the private details of like, well, what is your relationship like with your parents? You know, things like that. Because this, I don't think the way it plays out does kind of have its own mystery to it. And it's sinister too, in some ways, but actually with just questions that really get into your life, your situation. To speak to that specifically, I think as friends, this is where I would better be able to, I think, navigate this subject, because otherwise it's abstract and we can talk about the phenomenon of how it feels somatically in the body to experience shame. But if we're trying to answer it as like a fundamental question because it's playing out in your life recurringly, I would say let's get into some more details of where that's coming from. And I'm not saying that this is the place or the time to do that, but that's where it inevitably leads me. Otherwise, I feel we're talking around something that we might actually be able to talk to.
I'm appreciating that desire, or maybe desire is not the right word, but that inclination to move it towards the personal rather than the abstract and the theological and all of that. I think for me, I'm looking to the abstract and theological and what, with the way that this story is laid out within Christianity as sort of a, like I feel like I'm doing both, like I'm building this map from the bottom up, just from my own life and my own experiences. But then I'm realizing a lot of this is actually mapping well onto this Christian framework. What can I learn from the sort of the top down, what's already been mapped out, as I'm piecing together this map of my own. And it almost feels like if I were to, like I don't know where to start if I were to move it to the more personal level, because it seems even at that level, it seems like it's such a big topic. It's like, well, I could start anywhere. It's like pick up any aspect of my life and it's there to some degree. Yeah, it certainly shows up. I'm recalling psychedelic experience that I had recently. It was a pretty low dose of psilocybin, and yeah, it definitely my dad was a big part of that. Relating, it was sort of bringing together these two, the abstract theological and the personal, in noticing, oh, like that's my dad's big struggle, is the accuser is always whispering something in his ear, telling him that he's doing it wrong, or he is wrong in who he is. And so there's and in that experience, I got to sort of discuss with both my brothers afterwards, like we sort of all had similar elements to our experience with regard to our father, and that was really cool. It's like we see how as three young men, we've inherited a lot from our father. Like, we're our father's sons. And I think I at least for me, I saw that it wasn't just my father. Like, this is a generational thing. It goes back a long ways. Who knows how long?
Could I ask about the phenomenology of that experience with psilocybin? Because I feel there's a very interesting ongoing tension as we move through this conversation between narrative and experience. And I feel that's somehow key to this thing that's being invoked as the serpent. I almost feel the invocation of that is the act of fragmenting into narrative. Insofar as we stay there and don't come back to some sort of place where the notion of the serpent doesn't actually hold any credence at all.
Yeah. So in a I find this with most psychedelic experiences I have. It starts out, at least at the beginning, where there's a great deal of anxiety with regard to just the freedom of choice, just the combinatorial explosion in terms of what to explore and where to go. It's just like, how can I possibly choose? And that anxiety is sort of okay, yeah, the accuser voice comes into that. As soon as I go to make a choice, it's like, oh, but what about all of these other choices? Like, that's what that voice is saying. Like, why that one? And that's as soon as I go to make a choice, and then it feeds recursively back on itself, because then it starts critiquing that very process of, like, why don't you just commit to one? Like, why do you keep second guessing yourself? And at some point during that experience, I realized, like, hey, there's a common thread here. Like, anytime I go to make a choice, there's this voice, like that's calling into question that choice. Like, okay, why that one? Like, that you're doing it wrong. Like, what about all of these other ones? And so I sort of projected that externally and asked the question, like, hey, who are you? Like, what do you want? What are you up to here? And in that experience, it was a very vivid image of the character Randall from Monsters, Inc., the little lizard guy, the bad guy. This little purple lizard pops up on my shoulder with this expression like, oh, I've just been caught. Like, I've been found out. Like, and I look at him for a second and I'm like, go away. And then he sort of just like slithers off. And then like I continue on my way. So I'm not sure what to make of that, but it was a very, it's a reptilian creature. Like, that's how it showed up symbolically for me. And yeah, so phenomenologically, that was the sort of core experience of that accuser figure, sort of coming into a more tangible experiential form.
I feel that I understand what you're saying from my own firsthand experiences of grappling with that voice, in which I came up with a response that was like, is that so? So whenever that voice would speak, I would go, is that so? And that would be my way of questioning it. This was also at a time in which my anxiety took form of obsessive thought, obsessive intrusive thought, to such a level of destabilization that I did seek out therapy for it, which was its own journey. But in short, I actually don't have that anxious, intrusive, obsessive thinking anymore. It's actually not something that has hold of me, but did very much so. And that was my solution at the time, was to kind of somehow speak to it in a way in which I could sort of eradicate its power or whatever, to give some relief. But fast forward, first and foremost, can we just acknowledge that this is hard? It's hard. It's difficult. It's difficult to be actually what you are describing, although beautiful and eloquent, is hard to experience it. It's difficult. And it's not fun, as much as we can try to come up with ways to reckon with it that speak to your commitment to bettering yourself or whatever. But there's a level of pain here that I feel is somehow not being addressed. And that pain is what even gives rise to this type of looping of chronic thought and thinking and mentality that keeps us in its jaws. And it's somehow not speaking to the innocence. It's not speaking to the reality that some process is going on that is deeply uncomfortable and destabilizing. And if the critical voice is really nasty, it can be very demoralizing, whatever it is, however it shows up. I was very disconnected from my body for pretty much my whole life, or at least when, in the times in which I was connected to my body, I was not developmentally mature enough yet to even know that a connection or disconnection could happen. I was a child, you know? In my adult life or teenage life onward, many different things happened that disconnected me from my body, to the extent in which you don't even realize that that has occurred. And you're not, for me, I wasn't even sure. I doubted myself on all different sorts of levels, right? So I guess what I'm trying to say is, when I look back in hindsight, I have to just acknowledge to myself, damn girl, that was hard. Tough times. When you're in it and you're smart like you are, and you're freaking not just smart, you're intelligent, you're wise. We want to figure it out, but we don't always acknowledge that what we're going through is some serious existential awakening. And it can come through all sorts of different manifestations. And one of them can be a sort of type of chronic thinking that is always judging us and then somehow never gives us the satisfaction of anything that we choose to do. That's not fun. Where's the joy? Where's the compassion? If there's this tethering to something in the Bible, well, what about the components of the Bible or Christianity that offers the compassion for difficult times, so that we can see that we are in a painful process of trying to make sense of something, but it keeps coming back. This is where love as medicine comes in. It's not just accepting. It's a cognitive decision to go, I am a flawed human being and I am sinful, but I'm going to accept it anyway. You know, if that helps a person get to a better place, so be it. Have that cognitive thought that can anchor you from just feeling like, oh, I'm a sinful person and I should just be ashamed for that. But it's a cognitive. What we are getting down to, I believe, is who do we truly fundamentally believe we are? How do we fundamentally believe we are? If we deep down inside think that there is some brokenness or an aspect of ourselves that is just cannot be healed or detoxified, then whatever mechanism of ego or how consciousness has evolved to be that thing that speaks to the cracks, that speaks to the shadow, whatever it is, it's always going to find it. Can we somehow hold multitudes here and somehow reframe the narrative so that we can acknowledge when we're in pain and can give compassion to ourselves when we're in pain, instead of trying to think ourselves out of the pain, especially if it doesn't totally give relief and it just gives more of the same. I think what I'm saying is, at what point is not knowing putting down the just being with ourselves in the emotion, like if we can be with ourselves in that emotion and to that might be the move that speaks or gives a new answer. It relays new information, because if the questions are cognitive and the answers are cognitive, we are staying in the same plane. It has to move to a different language, perhaps one that is outside of thought and into presence, heart, acknowledgement, speaking to the innocence, speaking to the part of you that is not affected by ideas. If one believes that there is that, I do believe that I am not just constituted of my thoughts. And when I did, my life was really difficult.
Is it like a inner child that you're referring to?
It could be. It could be seen as an inner child, if that's helpful. But it's
an inner self that you are separated from, right?
Again, what is the remembering? Because when I'm in the remembering, I just know it. I don't have to put it on something. The deep knowing goes through the cellular level all the way through and out. It's the mechanism that makes you breathe easier. It's the mechanism of hope. It's the mechanism that releases the chains. And it's so much bigger than, it's the me that is bigger than the little me.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, the Christians would call that Jesus.
Right. And in doing so, somehow take one small step out of the present moment and into story, or at least some of the time, I think. I think that being that biggest self is actually what you and I have talked about mind, or even soul or psyche, like that. You are emerging insofar as we realize and can perceive that the world is emerging and being born and dying in every moment. And we bear witness to that, not as an abstraction, but phenomenologically in our day to day. Then we ourselves somehow become the changing seasons of the trees, and we become all these different beingness that exist with their own timelines and understandings and metaphors. I think there's a lot of peace to be found in that. And I think it's even more tightly related to the biblical narrative, or the journey into history, or the fall into history, that is somehow existing within the Judeo-Christian lineage, but also created by it, partly. And sometimes when I go out to the cemetery or forest, where I often go to connect with nature, to remember, I experience moments that are so pronounced and so prolonged and so free of this very constricted modern temporality, the temporality of a lifetime. And it's as if I am the first man looking out at creation, as you put it, and seeing the mystery of it. And yeah, it's like living in James Cameron's Avatar. You know, when reality becomes that unknown and interesting to you, then you can be very absorbed in the present, and it can somehow cultivate that not knowing that when the serpent comes along and tricks you into getting into this pathological state of thought that somehow is not in a loving acknowledgement of the underlying emotion, you can switch into the not knowing mode. Just as I can't remember what was the thing that you were saying to yourself, the words of affirmation, but I think not knowing also is one of those most deep, most solvent kind of possibilities in our reality that can then allow all of the other forms to be reorganized, you know, with the full musicality in the roots of that word organize. And
may I, before, because
yeah.
it's getting late, but one more thing. What if we turn it around and say the serpent is protecting us? What if we somehow think, what could be the possibility that there's something good that comes out of this component? What could that be? And in considering that there might actually be a function that isn't inherently bad or evil, it's a distraction. But a distraction from what? It could be that when we are in distraction with this conversation, it is somehow protecting, it's the ego perhaps protecting itself and saying, well, let's just keep ourselves really busy up here and play this little chasing game around the same thing and whatever, and exhaust ourselves up here, because it's better than if we put it down, put the conversation down, and get down to the emotion of what this is distracting me from. If we are trying to figure things out as a way of escaping an unpleasant feeling or an unpleasant other mental state, I'm not saying that's necessarily the case, but given the natural inclination of you, who is extremely inquisitive, it is somehow working through your gifts of being able to think far and wide and on many different levels. Your gift is included in this as you are trying to seek knowledge and answers. But if we sink down and put that aside for a moment, how you're actually doing, how's Joseph doing in this dance? How's Joseph feeling? then that's a whole other way for you to get to know you. And it could be scary. We don't know, but if it is, then it kind of makes sense that there's a function in you using your natural inclination to ask deep questions to keep you away from feeling dark, uncomfortable feelings. And I would say that's a mechanism of human beings. It's coping. Coping, even though sometimes the coping mechanisms aren't necessarily all that helpful to us either. But when the tears can just roll out and we can breathe and cry and go through whatever traumatic thing it needs to shake out of our bodies, to release, to shake it out, to find some peace, I would say invite that which can cool, get down, and get to know yourself in a way that only your most loving, compassionate self could afford you.
Yeah, okay, so I want to say something. First, there's it's almost like I want to, no, it's not, it doesn't feel defensive, but I want to stand up for myself and be like, hey, wait, I do that. Like I do that. I'm not just this sort of disembodied intellect kind of person. You know, there are days where I just need to sob. And I don't know what I'm sobbing about necessarily. It's pre-linguistic. But it's like there's something that needs to work through my body. And I think I think in general, what you're trying to, the move you're trying to make here is a very important move. And as you're talking, I'm thinking like, okay, what is it? I brought up the inner child, and I was noticing, okay, that the way of framing it is the inner child. It's very helpful for me. And when I see myself as a father to that inner child, and when I see myself as the inner child with a father, with a good father, that there's a wholeness that comes out of that. And I could feel that as I was sort of feeling into that as you were talking about, as you were talking. And there was one other thing I wanted to pick up on. I don't remember what it was. Oh, yes. Yeah. I think there, okay, so what I feel like the move you're making is it's a very feminine move, if you'll allow me. There's a, because the feminine is sort of it's opening up a spaciousness that's not trying to accomplish anything. It's not trying to do anything. It's just, it's opening up the space for that sort of emergent emergent creative potential to arise, or for something to be creative out of that potential that's created in the space.
I think it's a nurturing. I think the move
Yeah.
to nurture, to just emanate that. And I appreciate you standing up for yourself. If I've said anything that is not characteristic of your experience, it's absolutely the right thing to do.
No, that was my favorite part. That felt the yes and kind of move. And I also feel like very, like, a lot of gratitude that I want to recognize for the heartfelt and inquisitive exchange that you two have both brought to this. And excuse me. Yeah, it's been really wonderful, and I feel that sort of image or state that I was describing right at the beginning on that bike ride, of kind of just breathing in and out the world. That was really coming alive for me as you're talking about the feminine, in the sense that the body is, you know, an incomplete dialogic entity, like the nose and the mouth and the eyes and the ears and all these sensory orifices. There's always a breath coming in and out, and there's always a movement. And it feels like what we are seeking to live out, and also to give expression to and create possibility of through conversation, is this breathing in and breathing out of life, and the flexibility that is afforded by the depths of that, which are beyond the knowing of either of us, except insofar as we know there are further depths to that, further ways of surrendering to the creative, connective force of our lives. And so I also feel like invoking a ritual of closing the recording, and maybe we can continue.
Can I tie something together real quick, or try to?
Please do.
Yeah, to continue with that, the thread I started on just a moment ago. I think something I'm figuring out right now is discerning when that feminine spaciousness turns into, well, we talked about, this may have been before we started recording, talked about like a wallowing in wallowing in this this place of it's a lack of faith, because you have to, like, the feminine is that it opens up space to feel the shame and the anxiety and all of that, and that's, Hannah, what you're saying is, like, you have to feel the pain, like that's important, rather than try and sort of make sense of it at an intellectual level as a kind of distraction, a way to sort of get control of it, over it, and not actually be transformed by it. But at a certain point, I've noticed it feels at a certain point, it turns into you're just wallowing in shame and anxiety. And what was that?
An indulgence.
Mm-hmm. And the question is, okay, well, so I guess, yeah, that's where the masculine comes into play. It's like when you see that reality, when you see that being is taking up on this wallowing quality, it's like, okay, that's where this masculine, the masculine has to insert a sort of a seed of courage into the scene. And it's sort of like this, it feels like a wake-up call of like, okay, come on, like let's get our act together, sort of thing. Because you could wallow in this forever, but at the end of the day, you have to start taking steps in the creative process of life. And that's that eternal dialectic between the masculine and the feminine. The feminine is like, well, let's work through everything first, and then we'll go make things. And the masculine is like, let's make things so that we'll make things better, or we'll redeem the world through the things we create, something like that. And the feminine is let's sort of like put things together, let's redeem things first and then go create. It's something like that. That's the general idea. And so I think something I've been trying to figure out is, or something I've been working to discern is, okay, at what point in my sobbing is it time to be like, okay, it's time to get up and take the next step, the small step of courage. And that's what it feels like. It's like, at the end of the day, once you've worked through all of that stuff, that the pain that needs to, work through, it's bodily, it's deeply embodied, it's pain that needs to work its way through your body. At the end of the day, once that's through, it's like you can't just remain there in sort of this, because it can go on. It's like, I can always return to the childhood trauma and grieve over it. It's always going to be, the wound is always going to be there, but the part of the process of healing is yeah, it's knowing when to, like, okay, we've done the sobbing for now. Let's take the small courageous step, commit to that process. And it's like, there's small steps. And so you're, rather than seeing the serpent as like this cosmic all-encompassing figure, it's like, yeah, I know you. I'm just going to take one step to, come into a better relationship with the darkness of reality.
I understand what you're saying, and that's also been my response many times before. I actually think there's another response that has not been included in this. The feminine, whilst it does offer the space, what I feel is missing right now, and what I would like to say is also the feminine, but it could also be the empathetic masculine, whatever it is once in the space, you're absolutely right. We don't want to wallow and indulge to the point of excess, where then the only response is to try to get us back out into the world. Before that, the acknowledgement of the pain, to then respond empathetically to it, to perhaps say, are you okay? Are you okay? I know this is hard. I understand this is hard. that is something so fundamental that I feel gets skipped over, because when we don't have an empathetic response, we are in grief. And I know that, and I 100% know, because I've heard from your conversations, that you both allow for that spaciousness. You allow the tears. You do not deny yourselves that process. But once in it, can there be another voice, the empathetic mother, the empathetic father, that can comfort and acknowledge the wound and respond in a way that says, yeah, I get it. I get that this is hard. I get this is scary. And to somehow, because the reaction to wanting to just get on with it, whilst I understand that, yeah, if we're gonna just wallow in something, then, and we don't have any other response to the pain, that's probably the next best option, is to get on with it, because we cannot stay in that state. It's intolerable. But there could be some in between before
Yes.
getting on with it. The parent that knows how to stay with the child while the child is experiencing uncomfortable emotions, and the parent is strong enough to understand that this is, that they can somehow simultaneously give their presence so the child knows that they are safe. Something scary happened. Something scary happened. I am safe. Give me some time to process this and to feel the safety, the extension of my mother, or if we are adults and we don't have the physicality of the parent, then the extension of the parts of ourselves that can be with us and stay with us lovingly until we are ready to then get back on with it. So that when the loving voice is able to say, all right, you ready now? We can do this. There's trust. There's trust there. That it's not just about saying, all right, enough already, let's go. It's a different tone. And it's
Yes.
a tone that we're in this together.
Yes. No, I think
It's hard. I didn't do that with myself for years. I didn't do that with myself until like a month ago. So it's, and maybe you are doing that.
think you clarified what I think I wanted to say, but maybe expressed poorly. But you clarified it, which is that I do experience both. It's the it's usually a father for me. That's there's a simultaneous grace, which is what you're talking about, along with the active call to courage. There, both of those are together. There is the trust, there is the understanding of like the accommodation of all of the pain and suffering. Like that's not, it's there's no sense in which that's being shut out or shamed or done away with, but it's like that's all incorporated into this like call to stand up straight and face the world. And anyway, so thank you for clarifying that, because that's important.
And in that standing up straight, to find that rather than a kind of forcing one's self upward out of the downward sunkenness, that it's actually not about standing up straight and pulling one's shoulders back, but a kind of open-hearted surrender to things, in which it feels very much in the Zen tradition of a little thread at the top of one's spine is just things are being elongated from themselves. And you walk through the world openly, but there is a lifted composure.
It's relaxed but energized.
Mhm, mhm.
To bring us right back to our starting point. Yes.
Wow. Yeah.
I want to bring the drum back out again to draw this journey we've been on to a close.
Maybe we can collaboratively.
Yeah, maybe you can bang the drum and I'll hold it. All right. That was a pleasure, guys. Not enough sitting down time for me. I'm ready to get jiggy and moving again.
Yeah. Amen to that.
I'm astounded and proud and happy with what's going on. What's going on here between the three of us and with each of us. So lots of love.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is definitely a unique space for me in which to it explore ideas way up here, but in a way that's rooted, deeply rooted to the personal and the local and the everyday. There's it's rare that those sorts of spaces are rare where I get to bring that sort of rich, aesthetically rich, layered, integrated me into the space. And this is, yeah, you guys both afford that for me. So there's much appreciation
more
here.
and more and more of you. I hope that we get to meet you in person and talk openly and close about all the dreams and wishes and desires that are going on inside of you and inside of us, and just be able to share more space. And
Mhm.
yeah, it's just so good being able to talk with you, and I feel really grateful for having the opportunity to meet you through Jacob, and we're just really fortunate. So thank you, Joseph.
Well, thank you.
Stop the recording now.